It's 3,000 years old and it's up for auction in London, but Egypt wants it back. A quartz bust of the boy king Tutankhamun, who ruled Egypt around 1300 years BC, will go under the hammer at Christie's today. It's from a private collection and it's expected to raise over €3 million. But the Egyptian authorities say it was stolen from a temple in Luxor. Their attempts to delay the sale have so far had no success. Christie's maintains it's shown all relevant documents to both the Egyptian embassy in London and the Antiquities Minister. Well, I'm now joined live by archaeologist Jens Nottroff, who's in Berlin. Thanks for joining us on Good Morning Europe. Tell us a bit more first about this argument. Thanks. Tell us a bit more about this argument that Egypt is making, and are the Egyptians right?
Well, it all comes down to the question of the origin of the piece and the provenance, and if Christie's is able to prove that provenance. Egypt has an antiquities law since 1835, if I'm not mistaken, regulating the sale and export of antiquities. And I think it's since the law of 1983 that it's actually prohibited to export any cultural heritage object out of the country. So at the core of this problem is now when the piece left Egypt, and if Christie's is able to provide the proper papers to prove this. They argue it comes from a private collection dating back at least to the 1960s, so predating the 1983 law. And unfortunately, private collection used to become some kind of a topos, a general label for antiquities. We are not really sure where they're coming from. So in the end, it really depends on the legal paperwork to settle this case, in my opinion.
It's a recurring problem, isn't it? We've also had countries like Turkey and Italy complaining about goods they say are stolen, then being auctioned. How can this sort of problem be solved?
It is an old problem, actually, and it dates back to the early days of archaeology and actually
I'd like to do one more about
the collection of antiquities as well, meaning that archaeology has a very colonial history, so excavation permissions were rather asymmetrical. The antiquities market is now benefiting from the unsure legal situation back in the early 20th century, back in the late 19th century. So it really comes down to negotiating the origin, the provenance of these pieces, and I think it's more a thing of a dialogue that people need to come together and, on the one hand, see the law, the legal situation back then, and find a compromise that's good for all sides, actually, yeah.
And tell us a bit about the bust itself. It's fascinating, this bust of the most famous of Egyptian pharaohs, Tutankhamun. What makes it so special?
Well, it's coming from the so-called Amarna period, and this means it's from a time where in Egyptian art, some kind of innovation, some kind of artistic revolution took place. We all know the story of the sun god king Akhenaten, the father of Tutankhamun. And the special thing about this is that it's now much more naturalistic. The individual features of individuals depicted are much more emphasized. And in this case, it's Tutankhamun as depicted as the god of Amun. And the piece seems to come from the temple of Karnak because there are similar pieces known from the place. The thing is that Amarna objects like this are very rarely appearing on the open market because most of these pieces actually are in museum collections.
Fascinating stuff. That's archaeologist Jens Nottroff. Thanks very much for joining us there on Tutankhamun.
Thank you.
Live from Berlin.